people. Like Reince Priebus would stab your eyeball out with an ice pick, and then he would drop it in his dirty martini glass, and then he'd start talking to you. Okay, you're bleeding out of your eyeball, and your eyeball's in his martini glass, and he's treating it like nothing happened. Okay, that's Washington.
Welcome to The Feedback Loop, a Sino Global Capital podcast where we keep you in the loop about the most pressing issues in Web3 today. I'm your host, Mona Hamdy, a Harvard teaching fellow with 20 years of experience in nonprofit and sustainable development. I started using emerging technologies 15 years ago, working with remote peoples to create new economies based on the reversal of climate change. And today, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Sino, where I hope to bring beneficial technologies to the most forgotten corners of this planet. We are here in New York, high on salt fumes from the SALT conference, and I'm joined by two people you already know. But we are grateful to be here at Empire DAO and Solana Labs. I'm joined by Sino CEO, Matthew Graham, and the Harvard alum, White House administrating Tradfi crypto Tradfi super daddy, Anthony Scaramucci.
I mean, that was such a great introduction. Could we end the podcast right there so I can tell my kids that I was called that? I mean, that would be great.
Well, I think there's a lot of
people. It's funny that you say that, because if you listen to my kids, they're ready to kill me 90% of the time. So that's fine. But whatever.
It's no idea. Maybe when we get to it, we can tell them about how we met. He's a super dad, guys. But we want to start.
It's a real pleasure to be with both of you. I'm sorry, but it's great to be on. Did you have fun at SALT?
Loved it. It was so great to have, because we need that on both sides, to have the crypto people meet the TradFi people and vice versa. We need each other because we need them to get to the next stage of mainstream adoption. And they need us to be able to fully understand this technology that is revolutionizing many of the underpinnings of modern finance. So we need to get to know each other better. And that's why I really appreciated that better than any other conference or opportunity that I've seen. It was just a great a great melting of the two camps to get the vibe with each other.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. I got to share that with my my editorial team, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. And listen, I also want to make it open at SALT and non-linear. So the whole job is let people learn from each other, meet each other, potentially do more business with each other. But, I brought the Chainsmokers. I also want to have a good time.
The Chainsmokers was amazing, by the way. I stopped by, and I'm not a big music guy, so I don't really know. But
those guys are the best. I want them in residence. I would like them to do every SALT conference, So they did last year as well, but they're just so much fun, and they everybody shows up for them. I'm thrilled that you guys were there. Thank you very much for being there.
He tweeted about the Chainsmokers, by the way. That was one of the highlights. So that made the Matty Sino edit. But before all of the crypto stuff, and I think we'll get to that Disney cruise, the fateful Disney cruise that brought you to the announcement we heard last week. You were associated, especially, in my part of the world and in most of the world, with a really traditional background that brought you to Washington, D.C., a city that's in the news lately. So how did you get there? And what do you think about what's going on in Washington now?
Well, a couple of things. I think it's important to understand this about my life. So I'm just going to share it quickly. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood with blue-collar people. My dad had a greenie. What is that? That's a green uniform. He would take it off after he got off the crane, and he would put it in this safety clean drum, and they'd clean it for him, right? So I'm coming from a blue-collar neighborhood, blue-collar family. When I got into Harvard, my mother thought it was Hartford Law School, okay? Didn't know the difference, okay? Frankly, didn't care. And so I just want to set the scene for you. So I get to Wall Street. I know nobody, and I have no network. And so the only way really to get a network at that time, in my mind, was to go into politics. And so I became a political fundraiser because I knew I was working in the private bank at Goldman Sachs. I had to meet people. And so, believe it or not, I wrote my first check. It was for $250 to Rudy Giuliani for mayor. I was 25 years old, and it was 1989. This is before Rudy became Gugoots or Meshuggah or however you want to talk about it, right? But he helped me. I always will be fond of Mayor Giuliani because he lost that election. He won the second one. I became friends with him. He helped me grow my network. He introduced me to Governor Pataki. And so I was a dotted line into politics person. So my mistake among many, you don't have enough time on this podcast for all my mistakes, but my mistake among many, I needed to stay in that lane and just be an entrepreneur who had a dotted line into political fundraising. But when Donald Trump came on the stage, he was very disruptive. I was working for Jeb. Prior to Jeb, I was working for Scott Walker. So Trump wasn't even my first or second choice. He probably wouldn't have been my third choice, but he won the nomination. And I felt compelled due to loyalty to the party to go work for him. We had an okay rapport. We're both New Yorkers. I'd known him from NBC and CNBC. Fast forward, he wins. He didn't expect to win. I didn't expect him to win. Fast forward, he names me to the transition team. And then he puts me on staff as his OPL director. See, people don't remember that, but I was the White House liaison.
That's right.
Priebus and Bannon hated my guts. And so they did everything that they could to block that job. Okay, they were writing nasty stories about me through their opposition research teams. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't need this. So I told Trump, these guys are bad dudes. I'm going to stay in New York. And here is the mistake of ego and pride. I then said to Trump, if you need to get rid of them, give me a call. I'd love to come down and wipe the two of them out. Okay. And that was a mistake. And so he hired me and he put me in the communications job. Do you know why I got the communications director's job? It was the only office open in the West Wing. So I'm in the study off the Oval Office. It's July 20th. He's hiring me. He doesn't even know what job he wants to give me. He calls the operations guy and he says, what office is open? The guy says, well, the comms office is open. You never replaced the comms guy that you fired, right? And so he looks at me, okay, you're the new communications director. I'm like, I can't do that job. I don't know anything about the job, And he says, all right, you just go there, figure it out, help me clean shop. Why am I giving you all that background? Because I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
So now I'm in Washington. I'm in a 360 circular firing squad. I make a mistake and I get fired. Okay, that's commonplace in Washington. Okay, there's a term in Washington. It starts with rat and it ends with the F word. Okay, I don't want to say it on your illustrious podcast. Okay, and they do that to each other all the time. Okay, These are weird people. Like Reince Priebus would stab your eyeball out with an ice pick, and then he would drop it in his dirty martini glass. Okay, and then he'd start talking to you. Okay, you're bleeding out of your eyeball. And your eyeball's in his martini glass, and he's treating it like nothing happened. Okay, that's Washington. Okay, so just trying to explain to you Washington. Okay, so right now, the forces are such in Washington where they don't like DeFi.
Yeah.
They don't want to make another class of billionaires that they can't control. They don't like the current crop of billionaires that they can't control. So they don't like it. Okay. And they'll do everything they can to slow it down. And that's the tragedy for the United States because these guys have gotten so far off mission. Okay. This is not about serving the public anymore, the idea of being a public servant, but it's about how am I going to serve myself to stay in power? You see what it is? And so that's where we are right now. And until the 60 or so million people that own crypto speak out on its behalf, and the lobbying from the crypto community eclipses the banking association. Believe me, they definitely don't want it. You think American Express wants you to pay your restaurant bill, wallet to wallet transfer to the restaurant, which already should be happening, but isn't because of all of this stultifying regulation. So I'm giving you a very long-winded answer, which I apologize for, but you need to understand the context of it in terms of where I'm coming from. I'm not a politician. I'm an entrepreneur, but something did happen to me in Washington. I was in a meeting in the West Wing with two Treasury officials. And I'm going to tell you right now, it was a Wednesday. You know how I know it was a Wednesday? I was only there for one Wednesday. So of course I remember it was a Wednesday. Okay. And they were talking about digitizing the US dollar. And I looked at them and said, what? And they said, yeah. And they explained to me what they were doing. I said, over the blockchain. And they were talking about Bitcoin. And they were talking about all these efficiencies that could come from a dollar digitization. Now, that's 5 years ago. It never happened. I'm not saying it won't ever happen. But I remember in my notes, I said, oh, my God, the Winklevosses may be right. I've got to go back and I've got to do homework on the blockchain. Of course, I got my ass fired 5 days later. So I went back to my office. I bought the URL skybridgebitcoin.com. And then I started building.
No way.
Yeah, that's the first thing I did. And then I started building. I bought a little bit of Bitcoin. I paid too much for it, at least at that time. It was sort of the top of the last cycle. And then I bought some more into the pandemic. And then I added it to my company's positions in the middle of the pandemic. But that's my odyssey into it. So the governmental stint for me, in my mind, pushed me into what you would call, or I would call, DeFi as a traditional TradeFi person.
So when you go back to Washington now as crypto daddy, so SkyBridge, SALT conference, we can talk a little bit about what that means for, the announcements that happened last week. How is Washington different for you now in light of, this week's announcements and in light of...
Well, listen, I think my relationship with Donald Trump and the adversarial nature of it, what it ultimately became, has probably made it more difficulty for me in the Republican Party circles, okay? Because the Republicans break down into three different groups. There's a group of people, believe it or not, that actually like Trump and they believe Trump and they like all of this hatred and white supremacy and all this nonsense. Then there's a group of people, those are like the political cowards, that they actually dislike it and they despise it and they tell the journalists privately that they don't like him, or that Kevin McCarthy's on the phone getting recorded saying he can't stand the guy, but then they fly down to Mar-a-Lago and kiss his boots, right? So those are the political cowards without any spines. And then there's the third category, which is sort of the Romney, Kissinger, Liz Cheney category, where they're like, this guy's a horrible human being, he's bad for the democracy, and they speak out for him, against him. I'm in that camp of Republicans. So I'm in the minority of a minority party, frankly, for this moment. So I don't have as close of a tie to Washington as I used to. Having said that, I'll say something to make you laugh. One of the guys doing due diligence on us for FTX said, yeah, you're a pretty popular guy. Even your haters actually secretly like you. Okay. And I started laughing about that. I said, probably haven't met my ex-wife, but that's a whole other topic. This is not a psychotherapy podcast. But the point I'm making is that I'm at least upfront. I wear everything on my sleeve. I tell people exactly what I think. I don't think you need to be that backstabber. I think I said at the White House that I was a front stabber. I'll tell you exactly who I am and what I'm doing. And Washington doesn't really like that. They're allergic to the truth and they want to hide in the shadows a lot. But I do predict that they're going to be forced to properly regulate the cryptocurrency markets, and they're going to be forced into a cash ETF, and they're going to be forced into these things because there's just too many people working on it now. And it's reminiscent of Uber, guys. Uber, none of these politicians or regulators wanted Uber. Certainly the taxi authorities didn't want Uber, but who ended up really wanting Uber were the people. And we still live in a pluralistic democratic society where the people will get what they want. So I do think this will be fairly regulated in spite of our current crop of political leaders.
That particular administration, and you in particular, were beloved in the Middle East. I think that especially you came across as very honest and very charismatic. And it was a particularly productive time for relationships between the United States and the Arab world and North Africa, but also in terms of DeFi. I think that we see regulation changing outside of the US because of that. But
in fairness, I give a lot of credit to Jared Kushner. I know he gets lambasted a lot to different people, but Jared really worked that very hard. And the UAE opening to Israel, the relationship softening with the Saudis. I think generally, I'm a huge proponent of all that stuff. I know there's good and bad in their system. There's good and bad in our system. I'm not a system relativist, but I am a believer that we need to have good relationships in the MENA region. And I'll just remind everybody that FDR set this up with Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia, 80 plus years ago. And it's incumbent upon both those nations, whatever our strengths and weaknesses are, to figure things out with each other. That's why we went to FII after the incident with the journalist. And I have been to FII and I will continue to go because I just think it's very important for us to have a relationship. I got criticized for doing that, by the way, but I'm a realist. And I'm someone that believes that more commercial activity amongst ourselves, more interdependence, is more peace and more prosperity for the majority of the people.
Your statements really do reflect that. It's interesting to me, and Matt, I think you talk about this often. So we use the United States crypto policy around the world as sort of a light post, a guiding light in how markets can be regulated. What's interesting, and I think both of you touch on this, you have a partisan sort of quandary about.
Well, I think for me, it's easy to understand why entrenched financial interests don't like crypto, and both on Wall Street and in government, actually, because it's almost, I view it almost as an innovator's dilemma situation played out on a nation state scale. So we're the incumbent in terms of being or at the very least, an epicenter of world finance. And this is disruptive to our cash cow in many ways. So that part I've always understood. That makes a lot of sense to me. But as a person who's a progressive, I'm sometimes almost bewildered by the fact that people on the left, the vast majority of them absolutely hate everything to do with crypto. And especially as a progressive, that's very confusing to me because I view it as something that's extremely positive for marginalized communities, potentially addresses the fact that intergenerational wealth mobility has been declining for years and years. It's fundamentally democratic and egalitarian in many, many respects with its underlying ethos of decentralization. So that's something that's always been a little confusing for me, especially again as a progressive. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, let's use a specific example, if you don't mind. That would be Elizabeth Warren. And so
Right.
I find her to be the oddest person because she's supposedly for the unbanked. She's supposedly for advancing inner city youth, and she's supposedly for all those marginalized people that you're talking about. Yet she's decidedly against crypto, and her disciple is Gary Gensler. And so they're joined at the hip. They're mostly Siamese twins at this point. And so a result of which, nothing's going to get done because of her blockade. And so the real reason, and I'm sorry to sound so cynical, I'm not a cynic, but I'm just making a cynical observation. She hates that people have gotten rich off of this. So she doesn't like Mike Novograss's net worth derived from Ethereum and Bitcoin. She doesn't like the fact that this industry, because very hardworking people will create economic rent in the industry and will create value and therefore make money for themselves. She doesn't like it. It really, really bothers her. She doesn't want there to be any billionaires on the planet. And she is really somebody that is for capped or equal outcomes. So I also share your values as it relates to progressivism in the following sense. I am about equal opportunity. I am not about equal outcomes. I want unequal outcomes pursuant to people's hard work, their industry, their dreams, their luck, their risk-taking. That's what makes a great capitalist system. But we need to create a better bedrock of equal opportunity for our people. And we need to be more focused on that than scalping the rich. I don't think it's a winning strategy. So your points are well taken, and I totally agree with them. But until these people recognize something that's axiomatic in the Bible, okay? And what did the Bible say? The rich and the poor are always going to be among us. Okay. And I want you to think about that from a sociological point of view. It doesn't matter. You want to create a socialist system? Go look at socialist systems. There's a rim of people at the top that are living the high life. Everyone else is screwed. Okay. So there's always going to be levels of economic strata and levels of varying degrees of injustice. All we can do is try to create the fairest society possible. So when Elizabeth Warren is talking negatively about crypto and DeFi, my response to that is that's absolutely absurd because this stuff is egalitarian. This stuff is going to empower the individual. If I'm an expat from El Salvador and I want to send my mom and dad some money, and I want to send it back to El Salvador, it's going to cost me 10%. I'm unbanked.
That's right.
I go to the Western Union or I go to MoneyGram. I say, here's 10 $100 bills. Can you please send mom my money? They take 10% for themselves. Mom gets $900. But imagine a wallet to wallet transfer over Solana, Ethereum, Bitcoin. Okay. Mom ends up with almost entirely the $1,000 that I'm trying to save her, try to give her. So just think about this. There's $140 billion of money transferred from Latin American expats to their family members in South and Latin America. And yet they don't get all that money because of all of these intermediaries. And so, Miss Senator Warren, we have this technology and this capability that will save those people that money. Would you allow us, please, to regulate it fairly so we can do that for those people? No is the answer, because Mike Novogratz is going to get rich from that, and I can't handle that. My personality is not allowing me to handle it.
I hope your personality always allows you to not handle that.
Well, I'm talking about, I'm talking in Elizabeth Warren's voice. Mike is a very close friend of mine. I want him to get very, very rich, and he's already rich, but even richer. I like seeing people make money, and I like seeing people get rich. Yeah. That's what I like. That's what I believe in.
Speaking of people saying things and hopefully everyone getting richer, Matt Levine tweeted about your family life in light of your very first trip to the Bahamas. And I know
you had a good response to that, too.
Yeah, exactly. So we know you're on your way to the Bahamas. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about.
Listen, I mean, these snarky journalists are too much. My wife is like, he's not making a joke. Of course, he was trying to get out of the water park. Okay, so I was trying to get out of the water park. I did say that to Sam. I said, Sam, it's you and me. You're the only thing stopping me from having to spend 8 hours in the water park. If you show up at lunch, you are the alibi for me. You're probably the only person here in the Bahamas that my wife would tolerate as an alibi. And so he's a good team player. He showed up. And we had a very nice vegetarian meal. And then we had a conversation related to potentially teaming up and getting closer. And so what I like about all that, and I think you guys know this about how deals work, that lunch was August the 6th. Our deal closed on September 7th. I think the money got wired on the 8th. So, if a deal is going to work and there's good comity, COMITY with each other, guess what happens? It closes very quickly. And so,
knowing him, I'm surprised it didn't close over dinner.
That's right.
Yeah, well, yeah, there you go. And I think it probably would have, but we're regulated. Exactly. Yeah. But my thing is, he's a visionary. He's an incredibly good person. Ultimately, when I think about Sam Bankman-Fried, my Rosh, good person. I mean, this guy cares. He's someone that's going to use his wealth for effective altruism and rational based altruism. And he's wickedly smart, and he can parallel process a lot of different things at the same time. He's a great analytical capability. And I'm hoping, and by the way, he doesn't need my help on any of this because he can get to anybody in the world that he wants to. But I think I have, a couple of decades of relationships with a lot of different people. And if I can avail any of that relationship history and perhaps make it easier or better for him, I certainly want to try to do that. And I think that there's a good complementary skill set between the two of us. And by the way, I also told Sam, you are 30, but I think I am 30. Okay. So don't forget that about me. Okay. I'm not looking to get knocked out of the business yet. I don't want to hang up my cleats for another couple decades.
Anthony Scaramucci, we are proud of you. You bring the traddy to crypto and the crypto to the TradFi. So I am very, very excited to see what you do next.
Well, I'm very grateful to be on. Hopefully you'll invite me back and maybe you guys will come on my podcast. Is that all right, Mona?
Yeah, we'd love it. We can't wait. Our time is up for now, but the conversation is still going. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Sino Global Cap, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and leave us your feedback so we can loop it into upcoming episodes.